When Leeds United were promoted from the Championship in 2020, I genuinely thought that that would be the last we'd see of them in the EFL for the foreseeable future. It was the club who was on the up under Marcelo Bielsa, and given the stature and size of that club and the backing that I thought they'd get in the Premier League, there was no chance I could see them coming down to the Championship this soon. But fast forward a few years and a supercomputer has given Leeds a 97% chance of relegation on the final day of the season. I thought we'd unpack in today's video where things have gone wrong for Leeds this season and how coming down to the Championship next time could actually go on to affect them. So welcome to the video, any Leeds fans that will be sticking around on the channel for the next season or so. If you are to be relegated, then you are welcomed back with open arms. In terms of the state of play going into the final game week, this is how it's looking for Leeds. Pretty bleak in all circumstances, especially after Leicester picked up that point against Newcastle. Now means that they're relying on two teams above them dropping points, and Leeds will have to beat Spurs. No other result will do, and even if one of Everton or Leicester wins on the final day, then that's lights out for Leeds. Coincidentally, we've seen some bonkers final days before, and obviously we had last season Leeds surviving on the final day with that win against Brentford. I wouldn't be massively surprised if they do pull off a shock and get a result against Tottenham with that Ellen Road crowd backing them on. But for both Everton and Leicester to lose as well, I do think it's a really tall order. So let's first of all start out with the managers who have been in the dugout at Ellen Road this season and have a deeper dig into where each of them went wrong. It was Jesse Marsch at the start of the season. He was afforded 20 games before he was eventually given the chop. Javi Gracia comes in, tries to make an impact, and while things are fairly promising in his first few games, things quickly unravel there. And then Big Sam's brought in for the final 4 games to try and work a miracle. Flipping back over to Jesse Marsch, I mean, a continual problem that Leeds have had with each of their managers is they've been conceding more goals than they've been scoring, and that's been the trend throughout all of them. Leeds started out fairly brightly. They only lost 2 of their opening 7 matches to this Premier League season, but as soon as October hit, a really sluggish run of form from this Leeds squad. And I actually think that Marsch would have lost his job significantly sooner had they not pulled off that shock win away at Anfield. Going into that game, Leeds had lost 4 games on the bounce, and it just felt like everything was pointing towards his eventual exit. But they pulled a shock result out of nowhere. It afforded him a bit more time, but there was no sort of consistency that was built on the back of that, really. Averaging 0.9 points per game throughout Marsch's tenure based on the results this season. If projected over the entire season, that would see Leeds finishing on 34 points, which probably isn't going to be enough to keep them up. Javi Gracia then comes in, the former Watford manager, to try and lift the players' spirits. And while there is a bounce in terms of the results, they picked up wins against Southampton, Wolves and Nottingham Forest, 3 huge wins under the Spanish boss. The way in which his time ended at the club was absolutely rancid. The goals they were conceding, and we can see right there under Gracia, 2.5 goals against per game. They took absolute batterings against the likes of Palace, Liverpool and Bournemouth, and that was ultimately the final nail in the coffin when this Leeds squad was looking down and out. And then they give the job to Big Sam. I think a lot of people surprised, really, but he comes out of retirement and ultimately has struggled to get those results. While there has been an obvious upturn, I think, in the performances, they weren't played off the park by Man City when they went away to the Etihad. Actually defended quite well for the vast majority of that game, but just ended up losing. Had some good moments against a really tough Newcastle side as well, but the Bamford miss sort of sunk them in that game. And then the latest one against West Ham, they needed the result from that one realistically to keep their survival hopes properly alive going into the final day and not massively relying on other results going their way. So it's a very small sample size we're judging Big Sam off there, but just 0.3 points per game, which is the lowest of the 3 managers, but obviously he has had a tough fixture running and only been in charge for 3 games so far. But the continual pattern we can see there, not scoring at a rate which is outperforming the goals they're conceding, and that's always going to be a recipe for disaster. And we've had the 2 managers who have been in the job the longest averaging around a point per game, which also isn't miraculous. Now, a big reason behind this downfall was the recruitment. Ultimately, it was a big reason why Victor Orta ended up stepping away from the project, and we can see here the signings that Leeds have made throughout the season, both in the summer window and in January as well. A hell of a lot of money was spent. Now, let's not forget that they lost their 2 best players from the last campaign in both Calvin Phillips and Rafinha leaving, and those sorts of players were always going to leave a big hole to be filled, but certainly wasn't for the lack of spending at Leeds. What we can see, the profile of player that Leeds have gone after hire people from around Europe of a younger profile. I believe Leeds have got the third youngest squad in the Premier League, only behind Arsenal and Southampton. But similarly to Southampton, a real problem I think Leeds have run into is investing in so many young players while they've not got the basis of a solid squad to begin with. And when you throw all these players in at the deep end at once and try to make it work, you run into a lot of problems. I think Southampton have run into some very similar problems this season actually, and they're now paying the consequences of that in the Championship. A side who I think do recruitment brilliantly, and I think are being recognised for that now, are Brighton. And the way they get it right is, yes, they do invest in those younger stars from around Europe and around the globe, but what they also have to fall back on is a really solid spine of players, and that's just not been present at Leeds this season. You know, for every youngster that Brighton bring in, they've got the likes of Lewis Dunk, Adam Lallana, Danny Welbeck to go ahead and back them up. And at Leeds this season, it has felt, to me at least from the outside watching in, that those experienced players either haven't been at the level this season or have just not been present entirely, and that for me is a real problem looking into this sort of project. Another problem that Leeds have had this season has been with their final product. A lot is made of Patrick Bamford and his finishing, but that has been an issue, especially in some of those clutch moments towards the end of the season where he has fluffed his lines, and ultimately he has been one of the bigger XG underperformers in the league. Consecutively actually, Bamford has underperformed his XG in every season he's been at Leeds. Totally get what else he brings to the table here, but it's felt like that's been a real issue with them at points. And on the flip side of that, at the opposite end of the pitch as well, I totally get that Meslier hasn't been helped out by his defensive line, as shots have been far too easy to come against him. But the second biggest underperformer from a goalkeeping perspective in the Premier League this season, with a minus 12.4 post-shot expected goals. No getting away from that being a massive flaw. When your striker's underperforming and your goalkeeper's underperforming by that much, you're always going to find it tough, and no matter what goes on in the middling part of the pitch. And you know, it was the first thing that Big Sam decides to do, so to switch up the goalkeepers, and just felt like this second half of the season especially, he has suffered from a little bit of a confidence crisis and has regressed in his overall performances. So how does all of this affect Leeds going into next season? Well, the first thing is they're going to have to shift a hell of a lot of these massive wages off the weekly wage bill. No doubt that a lot of these will have triggers in the contracts for Leeds being relegated and a reduction in wages and things like that. But for context, going off the salary spot figures, and I get that they're not 100% accurate, but they're the closest thing we've got to go off. Leeds are currently paying out over £1.1 million a week on wages to their players, and this is base salaries only. That weekly wage bill right there is over £500,000 more than any other Championship club this season. So yeah, that's going to be the first port of call, and to try and reshape this squad then going down to the Championship. And then we get to the whole behind the scenes issue and managerial position heading into next season as well. Who that next director of football is going to be is absolutely crucial to scope this Leeds squad and whole club going forward for the next decade or so. There have been some rumblings coming out from the Allardyce camp that I've seen in the media that maybe he'd be happy to take that Leeds job heading into next season in the Championship, but to me it just feels like the whole club from top to bottom needs a clean slate and a total rebuild, almost in the brand that Burnley have managed to do in the Championship this season. If we think about how much they were built in the image of Sean Dyche and the previous owners, but to come down into the Championship this time and completely rework the behind the scenes structure and the playing squad as well, that right there is the sort of rebuild that I've got in mind for Leeds. But that's, you know, a lot easier said than done. Despite the money that Burnley spent, I'd still back it up as an unbelievable job that Vincent Kompany's done this season, because we've seen so many parachute teams get it wrong. But I would welcome some Leeds United fans' thoughts in the comments down below. If it is going to be Championship football next season, who do you see from your playing squad right now as those key players for the Championship who you do realistically see sticking around, and who will be those saleable assets who you think will be straight out the door? Ideal manager as well, let me know. But it should be an interesting final weekend in the Championship, and heading into next season it's going to get even tastier, I feel like, for Leeds. So there we have it, guys. That will wrap it up for today's video. Quick little video there. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do stick around and subscribe for some regular footballing content. Apart from that, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.